Hello, everyone. It's Mr. Nobody bringing you another episode of Making Nobody Happy. So it's nice to see you all again. Happy holidays if you're watching this at the time that I'm releasing it. We're finally into the December period. Now, I wanted to go through it's an entry that I wrote originally quite a while back, several years back, but it's always to me been one that's stuck out in my mind on my blog, and it's called Roommates versus Spouses. So, what is the difference between having a husband or wife and having a roommate? Now, the two overlap, and it's very easy for one to slowly become the other, especially as the passions of life cool, as the passions of youth cool, and life becomes more stable and predictable, as our daily lives become more about the regular effort required to maintain our lives rather than to generate it. So how do you prevent your lover from becoming merely your roommate? I once heard a middle-aged comedian discuss this very question. It was Chris Rock, actually. And his answer, which had a certain humorously raw quality to it, was that you got to... Now, all jokes aside, that is what makes the difference. On the most basic level, what distinguishes the romantic relationship from merely friendship or cohabitation. When you have a roommate, you both inhabit the same space. When you have a spouse, you inhabit each other. That is part of the shared person idea, that it's not that you and I are together in this place, it's that you and I are together in each other. Now, sex isn't the limit of this kind of co-inhabitation, but it is symbolic, it is emblematic, and it is endemic. It is a ritual of maintenance, it is a fulfillment, it's a reminder, it's a means. It has significance across multiple domains of your life together. It fulfills your past, and it creates and reinforces your future. And children, as the exclusive result of sex, are themselves also significant across multiple domains. They're symbols as well as literal representations of your attempt to inhabit one another, to inhabit a shared identity, and to create the future power and possibilities of that union, as well as bringing together your literal genetic and personal and historical pasts to a single meeting, resulting in a present responsibility for that new creation. So this is what I'm trying to say. Sex is the symbol, it is the maintenance, it is the action that produces the future things. Like, it is connected to all these things. It is a case where you have something that is more than what it is. So, in other words, sex has significance. That's why people make such a big deal about it. This is why sex makes such a big difference between just having a roommate or just having a friend and having a husband or wife. So if you want to keep having a spouse and not a roommate, I have to agree with Chris Rock. You do have to, but is it really that simple? Well, no and yes. So sex has significance across all these many domains of meaning, but you can have sex without actually engaging on all these levels of meaning that it has for you as a person and across your entire life and your social connection. Like, there's so many dimensions that sex can stick its tendrils into and be connected to, but you can have it without actually connecting to all of those, without engaging on all the levels of its meaning. So you can engage in sex as this shared meta phenomenon, the joining of two into one shared identity, this romantic economy, and that's something I've talked about before, and I want to talk about more because it's a key concept for me for understanding the way the entire world works. But you can you can engage in sex, which is this super huge meta phenomenon, without actually activating or going through all of the different channels that it's connected to. And that's both a strength of sex and that's also a weakness of sex. So it's good because it means you can participate in the romantic economy of sex. It's this, what I mean by romantic economy is there's a way in which just having something is kind of static and doesn't grow. And in the romantic economy, you actually, instead, it is an economy, like you create a system of exchange. And somehow through that exchange, you both get things that you needed and wanted, as well as finding uses for things that you had. And in the process, actually, everybody is enriched. Like everybody actually ends up more. It's a true engine of creation. And it's more productive than even just having things or being things, is this amazing system of exchange. I mean, there's a reason why the entire world, even the simplest societies can be construed as economies. And I think romance is a kind of economy itself. It is this amazing system of exchange, of coming to the table with things and getting things and giving things. And and the amazing thing is it produces so much. It's so immensely productive. But as I say, you can participate in some part of sex, which has effects across all these domains. You can participate in the romantic economy of sex on the most basic physical level, some part of what sex means without all of them. You can even do it absent the actual physical contact. So you can participate in parts of the overall process and parts of the exchange and the living dynamic of what sex is, without actually physically doing the deed. In the same way, you can be physically doing the deed while not participating in all these other things that also make up what sex is. And often, you will need to do these things. If you want, for example, the physical part of sex to work out, you're probably going to need to participate in some of these other levels across which sex, this meta phenomena, is extended. And vice versa. So let's get into some of the details, because there are some differences in the way people approach it. Some of this is individual, but there's also some general differences when it comes to genders. Now, men tend to focus on the climactic physical fulfillment as the key moment of significance and the reaffirmation of the bond, whereas women may focus more on the rituals and interactions that lead up to that climactic fulfillment. Those bits of kindness and foreplay, the preparation of the romantic enclave, the giving of gifts and attention and insight that show that this person has something worth receiving. And it's not just humans that do this. You often see this even just if you spend much time, like I have, watching animals and learning about animals and the mating rituals of animals. But it's humans we're interested in today. And as I say, males tend to fixate on the physical climactic, like the literalization of the sex. Whereas, as I say, women often have much more interest in all of the things that are the branches spreading out from the tree, the other ways, these roots that go into other places, and everything that is bringing you toward that central place where everything meets. Like I said, all those other things that you do that show we want to travel toward that point. And if you're in, a committed relationship, a spousal relationship, let's say that relationship bears fruit, like children. Providing for them, providing care, caring for and providing for the shared home. All of those can actually become meaningful acts within the romantic economy. They all become very useful for maintaining it, and they become very meaningful to the people within that relationship. And so this is an example of sex pulling other stuff into itself, these roots and these branches reaching out and connecting to other things, making other things part of it. And so you might still have this literalization at the core, but it's spreading, it's getting bigger, it's getting more complex. So, like I said, even things like in a very developed, a 50-year-old relationship, where it's like, well, these little things that you're doing for each other become part of what sex is and what sex means between you and your spouse. They're part of maintaining the relationship. They're part of keeping the romantic economy going. They all become aspects of the fully extended dimensions of the sexual union across a united human life. So sex, while there is this core, like I said, you can see that physical act. It's almost like a cane, if you know what I mean. Just a single little stick of a tree. But when it's planted, it grows and it extends itself into everything. It becomes huge. It grows and grows and grows. Like I said, it starts bearing fruit. Those start creating more little trees, more little canes, all sorts of things. You're providing shade for them. All of this is growing out of and can become connected to this central core, as it's putting its roots down to all these other areas, stabilizing it, complexifying it, extending it, what it is, until finally you get these giant relationships that have grown to become like an oak that covers an entire park. And I've seen that in person, of these sort of 50-year relationships where you're like, this is like, it started with these little things, and it has grown into something vast and is fruitful and is growing and is multiplying, and it has its roots into so many different things. It has its branches spread over so mmany different things, but it still is all connected at the core by this. Anyway, so complexity, but this is the thing. You also don't want to leave that core and let it rot and let it become hollow and dead. And you get that sometimes with these old giant trees, and the cores of them have gone quite rotten and empty and hollow, and it's turned to dust. It's very easy to get bogged down, actually, in all of these other ways of supporting the romantic economy and not remember to actually do the deed. Or you might, this is the opposite mistake, you might attempt to do the deed and forget or skip all these other things. And that's also a loss. Because the system exists, because sex actually exists on so many levels, it's very easy to cheat. It's very easy to try to only interact on the level that matters most to you. To get in and get out, so to speak, instead of remaining and being fully connected and paying the price of engagement across multiple levels. Why do you think it's called an engagement? Because you're buying into, you're engaging with the whole relationship in all of its possible dimensions. So I think the word engagement is so appropriate. Now, when I'm saying this, I'm not just singling out men here, who are notorious for trying to reduce the potential meaning of this relationship down to something that is unidimensional. I'm not saying it's only men. This is actually a problem for everyone. Everyone can have this problem of doing it. And the reason that it's a problem for everyone is because the total sexual relationship, it's so big and complex. And it's so big and complex that it's very easy to focus on the one part that we're good at, or the one part that we care about, or the one part that really means the most to us, and ignore and de-emphasize and not invest in the other parts. So men's focus on the highly tangible aspects of sex, like nakedness, intimate touch, and orgasmic release, to them, that is a focus on the things that truly embody and fulfill the concept of the romantic economy for them. For them, they encapsulate special aspects of the nature of this special romantic this special relationship that hold great power for them, and that to them do accurately represent what is truly special about the romantic relationship. Like, they're not shallow things. They obsess over them because they're actually deeply meaningful and valuable to them. They carry immense weight. And it's just that the way that they're designed is a little more focused into that particularity. It's funny because, you even look at the way male and female physical sensation focus, and it's like, well, with men, it's pretty narrow. It's like most of your sensation is very particularly centered, and it doesn't even work unless you do a very particular sort of thing. Whereas with women, it's big, omnidirectional, complex, hard to figure out, distributed, and also, and like I said, you can affect it with bunches of different things, tons of different things. That can be difficult to figure out sometimes, but it's like there's this huge variety. It's like, well, men, it's like, well, if you don't do this, nothing. Women, it's like, well, there's a whole bunch of things you could be doing and a whole bunch of places you could be doing it. So this is just an example of something I've talked about before, where there's a sense in which the structure of things at the most basic level scale up to the higher levels. So realities that you see represented in very simple biological facts will themselves be scaled up to larger, more complex and extended emotional, personal, psychological factors. Anyway, so as I say, the thing to remember about men is there isn't something wrong with them, that they have this confinement, that they find such insane amounts of significance in something like nakedness. They genuinely see that as truly immensely meaningful and representative of the special relationship that you have with them. That it's like, I am fully revealed to you, you are fully revealed to me. That means an immense amount to them. They're perceiving some great beauty. They are being blown away by it. So, like I say, these things that seem simple are not simple for them. And so you can't just dismiss it because that's by design and it's pretty universal. Instead, you need to understand it and try to appreciate it. And that also goes into vice versa. But as I say, these things truly embody and actually fulfill the concept of the romantic relationship for men. They, as I said, encapsulate special aspects of the nature of sex that hold great power for them. They accurately represent what is special about the romantic relationship to them. And you can't take that away from them and not have deprived them of the primary way that they actually access and reaffirm the significance of the romantic relationship across the dimension of their lives. You can't pull that out from under them and say that's wrong, that's bad, that's not good. We're gonna say, no, you can't do that, without, well, you've just destroyed and walled off what is for them the primary channel. Like this great method of meaning, this great fountain of meaning, this great river of meaning for them, which holds immense power. You're just saying, well, we're just gonna dam that off. Like, you can't cut that off without having massive effects on them. If you do take that away from them, you can expect the other dimensions of the relationship to suffer, because that window to it, that access point to its full meaning, now, as I said, that isn't its full meaning, but that is their primary access point for them to its meaning. It is terribly important to them. And so all the other areas of its meaning will be damaged for them. It'll be harder for them to get to it. It'll be harder for them to drink that water and access the river. This particular thing, this very tangible physical things, this is the easiest way to get a man to inhabit you and to inhabit your shared identity, to get him excited about it, to get him re-energized about it, to get him invested in it, to get him to understanding what it means. It is the easiest way and the strongest way and the quickest way, the most powerful way to keep him as a husband instead of just a roommate. Now, it is really just one entry into a very large mansion that the romantic relationship creates. But as far as he is concerned, It is the grand entrance and the front door. And if the front door to the mansion is shut too often, he won't feel welcome inside that shared space of identity. Now, as I'm not a woman, I don't feel I can speak authoritatively about them, not having been inside their heads. But if I had to describe what matters for women and sort of their particular skew on this, so like I said, we're both doing the same thing. We're participating in the same thing. We're just coming to a slightly different approaches. If I had to say what matters for women, based on my own experience, the answer would be everything else. Yes, sex to some degree, but sex as a function of everything else. Men in general, even neurologically, are more kind of singular, and they tend to specialize into narrow bands of development and focus, whereas women are a lot more distributed, a lot more cross-connected, including in their brains. And there's a time I talked before about the differences approach. I'll try to find some time to talk about it again in here, where the approach to sexuality with men and women, what often, it's not universal, but generally speaking, it's extremely consistent about this difference between applying accelerants versus removing brakes, that with men, it's much easier to get them to have sex by applying accelerants, whereas it doesn't work that well on women. And with women, it's a little more about removing brakes. That's a more therapeutic discussion we can have sometime. I don't want to get too deep into that right now. But I think it is fair to say it's just more obvious to women in general that all this other stuff is also part of what sex is, of what the romantic economy is, what the shared relationship is. That it's not just this, it's all of these things. So they're looking at all of them more. They're less hyper-focused. It's more distributed. It's a little it's a little more complicated. So it's less easy for them to just chop sex out singularly from all of its levels of prismatic meaning and maintenance. That's just harder for women to do. And even when they do succeed at doing it, it tends to have a worse effect on them on many different levels. So as I said, it's just a little easier for women to see that sex isn't this one thing, that it's actually this prismatic thing putting out tendrils in many directions, and that there are many things that lead to it and build up to it and feed it and produce it, and which it re-extends itself to, and which are part of the maintenance and part of the journey of it. It's just a little more obvious to them. They see that a little more clearly, and they're able to approach it from more of these directions. And they'll have more significance for them. So these other things, these symbols of romance, these other extended dimensions of the romantic economy, they'll be just as tangible for them, symbols of what it means, as sex is to man. To a typical man, those sorts of things, these other extended dimensions, just won't seem quite as tangible and symbolic and earth-shatteringly significant as the things that men tend to focus on. But to women, they'll look at it and they'll be like, yeah, I can see it. I can see how this and this and this, I can see how these aspects of care, these things that you do, these symbols of the other dimensions of our relationship are just as concrete a part of it as being naked. So the rituals of mating, the dance, the affection, the presentation, the display, all those behaviors that we so richly arrayed in nature, almost always for the benefit of females to see, well, the females see those things. They see them. They can judge by them. They are a tangible part of sex for them. They are as tangible as the physical revelation, the removing of the barriers between that nudity and penetration present from the perspective of men. Now, it's fairly easy to remind a man about what is so wonderful about their partner and why they desire access to them. Just show them their partner with their clothes off, and that will generally do it. It doesn't usually really take much more than that. It's like, well, what does it take to convince them to have sex? Well, mostly just seeing their partner. I mean, it's so obvious and meaningful and tangible and actionable that, generally speaking, that's all you have to show them to convince them. Not because they're shallow, but because to them, it's actually carrying an immense amount of meaning and information. Now, the reverse is not necessarily true. Men generally need to reveal more than just their mere physical nakedness to arouse their wives. And let's be honest, most of us are not like amazing in that regard. Now, I'm not saying that it isn't still good, but it tends to not quite be enough, you know? Whereas you could have a couple that's been married 40 years and it's like, well, guess what? It was enough. Just seeing that for the guy. A little harder for that with the women often. You know, I mean, you just look at the stupid things that men have done. I mean, how many men have attempted revealing themselves physically only to be greeted with indifference or amusement or exasperation or even disgust? They like to think, look at me, aren't you excited? And it doesn't have the same effect. Instead, they're like, not really, or please put that away, or I'm about to call the cops. And it's like, I don't understand. That's not how I would react. You know, that's not what that would mean to me. And it's like, no, it doesn't that doesn't mean the same thing. You know, you need to take some different approaches, you know, but as I say, it's not that it hasn't been tried. It just doesn't work. As I say, how many men have tried to reveal themselves being like, hey, baby, check it out, only to just get back, you go, you know? A lot of men. And as I say, it hasn't stopped them from trying, and it probably never will. Now, women do, I think, actually want men to reveal themselves, to become aroused by them. They just have a different and much more complex idea of what that means. What does it mean for a man to reveal himself to a woman? It doesn't mean, show me your penis. Like, generally speaking, that's maybe with some, but generally speaking, no, that's not what they were asking. They were not looking for say a dick pic to bring a very tawdry modern sort of thing, but that fits into what I'm saying. This kind of miscommunication and misunderstanding. But as I say, women do want men to reveal themselves. It's just that it needs to be done across multiple levels of meaning, not just this one little central thing. Like, it is not just enough to have just that. No. It needs to be this richer, more complex revelation. It needs to be done across multiple levels of meaning so that the value, both sexes want to see the value of the other revealed to them. They want to see, is it there? They want to be shown it. They want to respond to it. But that value has to be revealed to women in a way that makes it tangible and desirable for them. So the somewhat dubious physical attraction of men can be good enough, as my mother once put it, because it gets inhabited by the meaning and attraction that men can possess and invest themselves into at all these other levels. You know, my mom told me that. She once said, you know, I was like, Dad, did you think Dad was handsome? And she's like, I thought he was good enough. You know, this is what I'm saying. Like, that revelation of just seeing him was not enough to really convince her. but he wasn't horrible looking. He wasn't a monster. And then there were other things she was looking at that were very tangible to her, very meaningful to her. And she said, ooh, this is an attractive guy. This is a truly attractive guy. Now, those things, like I said, it's just a difference of what is really tangible to you, what is really meaningful to you. And it's like, well, it's all real. It's all part of it. There can be differences between individuals, and there are general differences across the sex about what it is that comes off as the most tangible to you. You need to engage with all of those and recognize that they're actually all part of it. And the truth is, it's this difference between people and between the sexes that really, it explains a lot of the differences and misunderstandings between male and female sexual behavior, because they're just approaching the same object, the same truly complex object, with slightly differently attuned senses and differently attuned channels, and awarenesses. And so you might say it's almost like different senses. Maybe men have extremely overdeveloped eyes. You might say in this case, the eyes are sharp as a tack, hyper aware, but all of their other senses are slightly less well attuned. And it's not that they don't need to bring that on board. It's just that's going to be how they're going to come with things. This is where they're really going to perceive things the most easily, the most clearly, the most strongly, where they'll see the most vivid images. And maybe women have more well-attuned ears, well-attuned sense of touch. And it's interesting because, they've found enormous differences with men and women. Women prefer, for their romance, they like stories. They like to listen to things. Now, story is a terribly complex thing. It is not just an image. It's characters and relationships and progression over time and all sorts of different things and symbolic meanings, all this stuff. Even studies on things like men's and women's use of pornography. Men, it's just like visual, the most upfront, the most straight in your face it can possibly be. And for women, so much of it is written, an enormous amount of written. Or if it isn't written, it is, like I said, more story-based. So you have just this different way of coming toward the same things, but a different approach. But as I say, both sexes have attractiveness, and both of them want to reveal it to the other sex, and both sexes want to see it. They want to see that, yeah, you're worth it. I am attracted. There is something good there. There is something that I'm interested in. They want to have it revealed to them, but they just do things differently. They both make the revelations differently, and they perceive the revelations differently. And as a result, lots of misunderstandings, lots of miscommunication, lots of frustration, lots of, why didn't this work? Why did you do that? What does it take to please this person? So much confusion because we're not trying to understand each other that well, and we're certainly not trying to appreciate each other. And when we do become aware of the differences, it's much easier to just see those differences as a problem for us. Like, well, why can't you just be the same way that I am? But that's love for you. So, and as I said, learning how to actually appreciate each other and how to mutually maintain the romantic economy, and learning how to not make the mistake of trying to reduce it to just the bit that you like, is actually a problem for everybody. One problem that couples can really struggle with is not keeping up their end of this reciprocal economy. And the romantic economy, it is a miraculous thing because it truly generates an excess. Now, maybe that doesn't sound like a big deal. It's a humongous deal. We have something that actually produces more in result than what you put into it. Quite literally, you can put two people into it, and get back 4 or 7, or given enough time, dozens, and eventually hundreds or thousands, as it works itself out through the generations. This is one of the few truly creative systems that we have access to. It is actively anti-entropic. It is a miracle. But it only works as long as the exchange is kept up. This cycle of giving and receiving and recombining of risk and sacrifice and welcome and protection, it isn't like a one and done thing. This is a living, growing entity. It requires maintenance. It requires input. This is not a sculpture. This is not even, like I said, like a house. House is one metaphor, but like I said, a tree, if a tree could grow into a house, it would be a more accurate thing, because it is literally something that is alive. It is not a static object. It is not an artifice. It is an actual living thing. It is a living, growing entity. This shared identity that sex creates between people, it is an actual living super entity that lives across many dimensions. It puts out roots. It brings things under its shade. It bears fruit. It spreads itself further. It duplicates itself. It complexifies itself. It varies itself. It spreads out and out and out. It spreads the organism across eventually the whole earth, giving the chance. But if it doesn't keep up the basic process of respiration, the romantic exchange, the sort of sexual Krebs cycle, if it fails to unleash the energy that is contained within its elements, it has to breathe, it has to draw sustenance, it has to inhale, exhale, energy, water, all of these things. If you don't have that, if you don't feed it, if you don't let it breathe, if you don't have the romantic exchange actually functioning, as I say, this metabolic process, it's not going to produce. It's not going to be able to grow. It will weaken. It will go dormant, and it may even eventually die. So if a man tries to extract the energy for the sustenance of his part of the organism by focusing only on the physical aspect that is tangible and most desirable to him, and he doesn't contribute the materials necessary to maintain and make tangible the experience of the woman, he's going to starve that half of the cycle of the metabolic process. And in the process, he'll also starve his own half. Why? Because you can't starve half of a symbiotic organism without harming both halves. They actually both have to be alive. Like, this isn't a singular on its own thing. This is something that is created by this economy, by this interrelationship, by this intergeneration between the two. So you can't deplete the resources available for one half of a chemical reaction and expect the other reagent to receive enough back to be able to to unleash its transformation. Now, if you're a chemistry major, you maybe followed me on that. If you're not, I'm sorry if that was a little too abstract. But basically, it's like I said, it's like a chemical reaction. You've got two things. If you put them together, they both have these two reagents. They can provide these things to each other that chemically will cause the other to be transformed, to unleash this energy, to create this explosive growing process. Well, this one's suddenly just not going to give their bit anymore. Like, you might say, well, I want to take your ions, but I'm not going to give you mine. Well, guess what? That means this thing isn't going to be able to do its bit. It's a reaction. It's a reaction between the two. It takes the two. They both have to be exchanging. And so, yeah, that's not going to work, men. If you're starving the women of all the things that make their side of this reaction work, you're going to strangle it. You're going to strangle half of what this thing is made up of. And ultimately, that is going to come back to you, because you are both part of that. by the same token, if you have a man who is investing in the romantic economy, but his partner keeps holding back her contribution to his ability to unleash and access that living energy, if his point of tangible access to the energy produced by the relationship is blocked, he will starve and he will have less and less and less to contribute on his side, gradually impoverishing both halves of the equation. So, yeah, if men aren't able to access things from their direction, it's going to starve them and weaken them and make it hard for them, and they're not going to be able to contribute what they can contribute. And there is a disaster scenario. The disaster scenario, which can happen in an individual relationship, and it can also happen, frankly, in a society-wide relationship, because what is society but the collective experience of men and women making up this species together and having to live together and be together and reproduce the generations and exist together. We are all part of this one species. As I say, you can get this worst case scenario. It's the most dreaded result. It's what I would call the reverse process cycle, the process of unlife, the consumptive metabolism, where lack of available nutrients leads the organism to start burning its own parts for fuel. So in common parlance, we would call that a race to the bottom, a negative feedback loop. Each partner gives less and less and less, while often also trying to take more and more and more. And they both are doing this. And so the partner is giving less and less, and it's generating a loss instead of an excess. And instead of generating this creative excess that the romantic economy is starting to do, instead they're both generating this loss. And the shared romantic identity, this organism, is absorbing that loss. It's burning up its own strength and identity to survive until it gets so sick that it's all been burnt up and there's nothing left and it starts to die and it crumbles. So, love, of course, is something people have wrestled over a lot, that it is what it is. Why does it have to be like that? It is demanding a lot of you. Some people would say the system, and I don't think they're entirely wrong, seems unjust and extremely demanding. You're being asked to do and care about things that you don't want and don't care about, so someone else can hopefully get what they want, in the uncertain hope that as a result, you will get back what you need. Now, that is a pretty wild and uncertain arrangement, and a terribly demanding one, too. The amount of trust, the amount of sacrifice, the amount of putting yourself into someone else's hands that it is demanding of you is just catastrophically horrific. You know, this whole arrangement, it's a tangle of Byzantine complexity, out of which it isn't at all clear that we will get what we want or in any way be able to navigate it and work things out to our satisfaction. It provides no guarantees, it makes many demands, and it carries enormous risk. And to all that, to all of these perfectly true and reasonable objections, all I can say is, that's love for you. You can resent the romantic economy and how it works. You can resent your partner's failures and inadequacies. You can resent just their flat-out differences, that they are the particular thing and person that they are. But all you really get out of doing that is that you lose the romantic economy and the shared identity that it can produce. You lose this greater meta being and the amazing productive capacities that it has. And that is a pretty big loss to human society. Now, if you are not willing to give to the romantic economy what it requires to be sustained, it just won't be. This is a particular sort of organism. It is a certain kind of thing, and it has certain things that it requires to function and to live. And when it is functioning, it can do some amazing things. But if you cannot come to terms with it and see the value in it and love it and embrace it and risk yourself on it, all you will really get is its absence. And for some people, maybe that's preferable. Maybe that is understandably preferable from their perspective. It's certainly not easy putting up with the needs of someone whose demands and contributions don't match your own, but exist in this crazy, complex interplay with them. We would prefer to possess the whole means of generation and production within ourselves, to be our own just perfect and independent and absolute internal economy. We like to be self-sufficient, to have it all without having to rely on anyone else or have them rely on us. But that is the curse of the system and the price that it extracts. To admit something alien, to become something more than what we are, to participate in this crazy extended bananas process that by some miracle of magic produces everything that we see in our species. You know, it makes us into something else, some unity, some recombination of the elemental aspects of humanity. And somehow that recombination produces life in every sense of the word, across all the prismatic dimensions of being. And frankly, that's a miracle.